Hey guys, Chris from Average Eskate Reviews here, and today in this video we're going to be looking at the kits that are available on Unlimited Loaded website and also some of the decks that they have. What they do is they make a kit that you're able to attach onto any skateboard deck, whether it be a longboard deck or a more traditional skateboard deck, and you can essentially turn it into a powered board. They have lots of different options for you to be able to do this, or essentially three main options that you can pick from their website. They have what's called a solo kit, which consists of one hub motor and one battery. They also have a cruiser kit, which consists of one hub motor and two batteries. And they also have a race kit, which consists of two hub motors and two batteries. If you want more detail on what each of these kits does, I'll link their website down below and you can check that out. But just quickly, the solo kit allows you to hit a top speed of 23 miles an hour with an estimated range of 7 miles. And the cruiser kit allows you to hit a top speed also of 23 miles an hour with an expected range of about 13 miles. The race kit has a top speed of 26 miles an hour and allows you to hit roughly the same as the other one, which is about 13 miles. But of course, this being a first impressions video, we'll go into a lot more details on the actual performance in the review video that we'll film after this one. Now, when we look at the way that the deck looks, the way that the setup looks that we picked up, what I went for was the Icarus Deck with the cruiser kit. So this is essentially going to be a setup that's tailored for anyone that really likes to carve, that really likes to cruise. In terms of the look of the deck, the Icarus Deck that is, this is probably one of the most beautiful and elegantly designed decks that I've ever come across in my life. The artwork on the base of this deck is incredible, and the flex of this deck is unreal. One of the most flexible decks that I've ever stood on in my life. The concave and the general shape of the deck is also phenomenal. It's a little bit shorter than what I'm traditionally used to, but this didn't really affect my ability to ride it. It didn't affect my comfort on the deck. It was very, very nice. That has to be said. In terms of the actual system itself, everything that they've used on this deck or this board is, I consider, really high-end parts. Paris trucks and also orangutan wheels, 85mm street wheels. Everything works very, very well. The bushings are a little bit stiffer than I expected, but they weren't too stiff for me to be able to handle, and again, very high-end. So my setup being the cruiser setup, I had two batteries and one hub motor. Something I've got to mention is that the hub motors on this system are unlike any other hub motors I've come across. When you're riding these boards, they don't feel like hub motors. The urethane around these hub motors isn't the generic urethane that you see on things like X-Ways or other hub motor boards out there. It basically is the same as the front wheels, which are the orangutan wheels that I was talking about. Much thicker, curved edges, which is really nice for sliding, but also very nice for grip. Everything on this board just felt like it was done to a very, very high standard, and that's definitely reflected in the ride and feel when you're outside on the streets with them. In terms of the general performance, the speed is definitely something I'm going to mention. It's always one of the first things I like to touch on. I think that the speed that they give these boards is pretty accurate, give or take maybe 1 or 2 miles an hour depending on the terrain and the conditions you're riding in. So that's definitely not been an issue. This being a board that only has one hub motor, it does take a little bit of time for the board to get going, but once it does get going and you're cruising, it is definitely an ideal sort of setup to have if you're somebody that just wants to cruise, wants to carve, wants to just enjoy your ride without having to be too aggressive with the throttle. I think the setup definitely does work for that. But one thing that I did do was we were lucky enough to be able to get an extra hub motor with the setup that we had ordered. So what I did is, in terms of my cruiser setup, which has one motor, one battery, I replaced one of the rear wheels on the back of the board, so essentially turned the cruiser kit into a race kit. But I'll touch on that later on when we actually do the review and what effects that had on the board. But the top speed that they give you on this board is definitely accurate. The hill climbing capabilities and the general torque of this board, of course, are not going to be as great as the racer kit because this doesn't have two motors, it only has one. But again, if you're looking to cruise, you're looking to carve, and you're living somewhere that has predominantly flat streets and flat roads, not too many hills, this is definitely an ideal setup for those types of riders. Now that leads really nicely onto who's going to be best to pick up one of these boards or these kits that are offered. Like essentially the system that Unlimited X and Loaded are offering, who does that fit? I think if you're a traditional longboard rider already and you're thinking about coming into the world of electric, skateboards in general, this is definitely going to be a kit that you should pick up aside from everything else that's out there. The reason for that is because of how much control you have, because you're able to select exactly what deck you want to bolt the kit onto. So if you have a traditional longboard and you simply wanted to make that electric, that's exactly what this thing allows you to do. From there, if you're the type of person that really likes their skateboard decks, you like to have options, you like to pick exactly which deck you want, that's again where you'd benefit from picking up one of these kits, because it doesn't have to be a longboard deck. You can pick up any skateboard deck and throw this setup onto it, bearing in mind the setup that you have in terms of the wheels, making sure that that works and that fits the setup that this Unlimited Loaded X kit has, then you're golden. So in my opinion, those are the two types of people that would really benefit from considering picking up this kit. Now from there, looking at the ride of the board, the concave of the deck, or the general shape of the deck on the skateboard, is great. Your feet do feel planted. I will mention that it's a little bit more narrow than what I'm used to. So I think riding this board for very long distances would probably take its toll on me personally because of the type of footwear that I use. But again, based on the range that this board does and the fact that it has one motor, I don't think this is the type of board that you're going to be looking to put on miles and miles and miles. But generally how the ride of this board was, the wheels are incredibly grippy, both the front and the back. And as I mentioned earlier on in the video, it doesn't feel like you're riding hub motors with this board. It feels like you have the orangutan wheels on the back and also on the front, which was very, very surprising. So if you're wondering if the ride of this board is good, if you're carving, riding on predominantly flat streets without too many hills and smooth roads, the ride is fantastic. Now when we look at the brakes of this board, bearing in mind I have one motor, so only one of the motors or one of the wheels on the board would be braking, the brakes were definitely soft. I did have a quick go of the race kit that Ricky had with the Tesseract deck, and the braking was definitely sharper on that, but it was a little bit hard to predict. The brakes would either be very sharp and bite the board and stop you very nicely, or they'd be very soft, and it seemed to kind of chop and change between the two. But on my board with only one motor, 2 batteries, the braking was quite soft, so that's definitely worth considering. Now, of course, with the acceleration, bear in mind that this board only has one hub motor, so it does take a bit of time to be able to get the board going. It's not painfully sluggish, but just what we're normally used to. We're normally used to a little bit more torque, a little bit more poke. It takes the board a little bit of time to be able to get up to speed. But once it does, it holds its speed nicely, and you are able to pretty much hit the top speed that's suggested. Now, when we look at the remote of this board, something that definitely goes without saying, I don't know what you guys are like, but when I get new electronics, I don't ever look at the manual. I just open it up and I'm like, I'll figure it out myself. With this particular board, it's definitely worth mentioning, look through the remote. It's a very unconventional remote, and it definitely is worth looking at the manual to be able to figure out how to work it. Once we did that, it was very easy to use the remote, but while we were trying to play about with it ourselves, it took us a little bit of time because we were kind of guessing what we were doing rather than just looking at the manual in the first place. But in terms of actually using the remote with the board, it's much, much smaller than any other remote that I've used with an electric skateboard. And when you take it out of the packaging and look at it, you kind of sit there and think it's going to be a bit too small. It doesn't feel like it's going to be good for ergonomics. But when you actually get out on the streets and you're riding, no problems at all. The remote felt completely fine. But something I will mention is if you do wear gloves, like flatland gloves, because of the size of the remote, with the gloves on, it does feel smaller with the gloves on because of the general size of the remote, but it wasn't so small that it was difficult to control. It's just something, again, worth touching on that. If you have massive, massive hands, maybe consider that before you pick up this board, just based on the size of the remote. But actually looking through the remote, having looked at the manual, it's very easy to be able to sync the remote with the board. It's very easy to be able to go through the different options and change the different speed settings, to change the different options in the remote if you want miles an hour versus kilometers. That kind of stuff is very easy, and the display shows you pretty much everything that you'd expect. The batteries, a percentage on the remote, and also the board, the connectivity. But the only thing that was missing from the remote's display is how many miles you've done on the board. That's something that I think should come as standard with any board that has a display on it. But aside from that, everything works exactly as you expect it to, and all of the core information that you need, aside from how many miles that you're riding, is displayed on the screen. Now, something that I am going to touch on is dismantling and reassembling the actual kit on the board itself. Being able to switch the motors out, being able to put them back in, switching out the batteries is very, very easy. It's probably the easiest setup that I've messed around with to dismantle. The only way that I could describe it is it's almost bordering on like a modular device. You can literally just plug and play the batteries. There is one bolt that needs to be removed. It would have been nice if you didn't have to remove that one bolt, so you could essentially switch out batteries toolless, but one bolt, not complaining. The skate tool fits that particular bolt you have to remove very easily, so it's not a big deal. But I'm very impressed. I'm not very technically minded when it comes to dismantling things, and it's one of the things that I hate, if you've not got that impression from watching the podcast. But with this board, no problems at all. If I could do it, trust me, anyone can do it. Now, a couple more points on the way that the board rides. As I said before, the carving, everything like that is as you'd expect a board that's called the Cruiser to be able to do. But something I did notice, when you jump from double kingpin trucks to traditional trucks, you definitely feel the difference, but I didn't feel the difference as much on this board. Like if I jumped on a boosted board, or if I jumped on an X-Way or a Slick Revolution board, going to traditional trucks is something I felt. I was like, whoa, I didn't feel like I could turn anywhere near as well. But On this particular board, carving was really nice on this board. I definitely felt that I couldn't go as deep as my carves on other boards, but I know that's because I've been riding double kingpin trucks and I just need more of an adjusting period to be able to get this board carving the way I'd like to. But having seen the Unlimited Loaded X's website and some of the riders that they have testing their boards and what they can do on these boards, I don't doubt the performance of them. I know it's just me that needs to kind of get to grips with the single trucks as opposed to the double kingpins. But the general ride on this board has been good. I'm going to say it one more time again, this board does not feel like a hub motor board. It really doesn't. It does make a strange noise that unlike any of the hub motor boards that I've ridden, but it just feels so smooth in comparison to every other hub motor board that I've ever touched. Now, of course, I'm going to go into a lot more detail, even though this is quite a lengthy first impressions video. I'm going to go into much more detail in the review about my general feedback, my thoughts of the board, if this is a particular board that's going to be good for me. I'll go into all of that detail in the review. But as always, guys, make sure you leave any comments down below for any questions you want me to answer in the full-on review. Make sure you check out our podcast, which will be linked down below in the video description. Thumbs up and subscribe so you can stay up to date with all of the videos that we post. And as always, guys, I will catch you in the next video. Take care.